Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. The U.S. envoy to Yemen says the battle for the gas-rich MARIB region is the single biggest threat to peace efforts. Briefing U.S. lawmakers, Tim LANKAN warned of greater instability if the fighting between Houthi rebels and Yemeni forces is not stopped. He said Iran's support for Houthis is lethal and does not want to support a constructive resolution to the conflict. Germany has announced plans to pull out its troops from Afghanistan from early July following the last week decision by the US to withdraw by the 11th of September. But the Defense Ministry said the final decision rests with NATO. With 1,100 troops, Germany has the second biggest contingent of soldiers in the country after the US. The UN rights expert says Myanmar military's crackdown on anti-coup protests has displaced close to 250,000 people. In a tweet, Tom Andrews urged the world to address the humanitarian catastrophe in Myanmar, where 730 people have been killed since the February coup. The appeal comes as Myanmar's neighbors prepare for a crisis summit in Jakarta to discuss the coup. In India, 24 coronavirus patients lost their lives in a hospital due to a shortage of oxygen following massive leakage of the gas from a tanker. The country is currently in the eye of the COVID-19 storm, recording more than 2,000 deaths and nearly 300,000 infections in a day. Here in Pakistan, the virus claimed another 148 lives and infected nearly 5,500 people in the last 24 hours. Globally, there are now over 3 million deaths and more than 143 million infections. In the United States, a federal probe has been launched into policing practices in Minneapolis a day after one of its former officers was convicted of murder of George Floyd. Derek Chauvin was found guilty of a second-degree murder, third-degree murder and manslaughter. The murder of Floyd in May last year had sparked mass protests against racism in the country. And in cricket, Pakistan beat Zimbabwe in the first T20 international of a three-match series at Harare. They restricted Zimbabwe to 138 in reply to a target of 150 runs. Mohammad Rizwan was declared player of the match for scoring 82 runs. Those are the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. The U.S. has called the battle for Yemen's oil-rich MARIB region as the single biggest threat to peace efforts. Addressing lawmakers, U.S. Special Envoy on Yemen, Tim LANKAN, warned that the ongoing violence in MARIB will trigger instability. He said the increase in Houthi cross-border attacks on Saudi Arabia is a disturbing trend. LANKAN also pointed out that Iran's support for the rebels is significant and lethal. Hundreds of fighters have been killed since the large-scale offensive between the Houthis and Saudi-led forces began in February. The violence in MARIB would put hundreds of oil fields at risk of falling under the control of the Houthi rebels. Germany has announced plans to start withdrawing its troops deployed in Afghanistan from early July, but a Defense Ministry spokesperson says the final decision in this regard rests with NATO. With 1,100 troops, Germany has the second biggest contingent of soldiers in the country after the US. The United States has announced plans to pull out all forces by September the 11th, later than the May 1st deadline. That would coincide with the 20th anniversary of the terror attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon in 2001. NATO has also confirmed allies would begin withdrawing troops from the 1st of May. Angered at the delay in the withdrawal, the Taliban decided to shun all summits, including the upcoming talks in Turkey. Ankara has announced the postponement of the conference, saying the meeting will be meaningless without the Taliban's participation. The U.S. State Department hasn't yet confirmed the postponement. The talks in Istanbul were scheduled for this Saturday to fast-track a peace agreement between the Taliban and the Afghan government. Pakistan has reiterated its call for a peaceful resolution of the Jammu and Kashmir dispute. The Foreign Office tweeted this on the 73rd anniversary of the adoption of the UN Security Council Resolution 47. It said the resolution clearly establishes the right to self-determination to the people of Jammu and Kashmir. The Foreign Office said this right must be exercised through an impartial plebiscite. It lamented the fact that Kashmiris have been denied basic rights even to this day. Indian troops have killed over 300 Kashmiris since the revocation of the territory's status in August 2019. In Pakistan, 148 more people have lost their lives to COVID-19 in the past 24 hours. The Health Ministry said the countrywide death tally has now risen to 16,600. The ministry said almost 5,500 people tested positive for the virus overnight. It said the positivity rate is 11.63%. The caseload has crossed 772,000, out of which more than 672,000 have recovered. The number of active cases has risen to over 83,000, while more than 4,500 of them are critical. Meanwhile, the National Command and Operations Center will meet today to consider a travel ban from more countries after India. In India, at least 24 COVID-19 patients have died in a hospital in the western Nashik city after they lost oxygen supply due to a leak. This comes as the country is facing a surge in the coronavirus cases that soaks up supplies of the crucial gas. Officials say the incident occurred during a refilling of an oxygen tanker, but the cause of the accident is not yet clear. India is in the middle of a deadly second wave of infections, recently reporting over 200,000 cases daily. The surge has overwhelmed the country's hospitals, creating a shortage of oxygen, beds and life-saving drugs. India has logged its highest single-day COVID-19 deaths and infections. The country has registered over 2,000 fatalities and more than 295,000 cases overnight. Globally, the virus has claimed more than 3 million lives and infected over 142.6 million people. More in this report.
The newly published World Health Organization's data shows the world saw a record-setting new COVID-19 cases over the last 7 days. The largest increase of 57% occurred in Southeast Asia, where India accounted for 94% of infections and nearly 28% of new cases worldwide. India now averages nearly 10,000 cases and 70 deaths per hour as the government struggles to manage the surge. Meanwhile, millions continue to return to rural areas even on foot due to lockdown in major cities.
I did not get on any bus or train in the Anand Vihar area, so I am searching for other means of transportation. And if I do not get anything, I will have to walk to the village. My company has been closed due to the lockdown. Last year as well, when lockdown was imposed, I had to walk back all the way to my home.
Over in Europe, Turkey reported a record number of single-day deaths as the virus claimed 346 lives in the past 24 hours. Britain has launched a search for antivirals to serve as effective at-home treatments by the end of the year. The Netherlands is set to ease restrictions from next week as pressure to reopen society mounts despite high infection rates. Meanwhile, the European Medicines Agency has found a link between Johnson & Johnson's vaccine and blood clotting. But it says the overall benefits of Johnson & Johnson's vaccines outweigh any risks.
The PROC has concluded that there is a possible link between the occurrence of these blood clots combined with the low levels of blood platelets, thrombocytopenia, and the vaccination with the COVID-19 vaccine Janssen. The product information will be updated to reflect this information and will include a warning and an update of the side effects.
Janssen says it will resume its vaccine shipment to the European Union, Norway and Iceland. Sweden has announced to give a different second dose to people under the age of 65 who received the first dose of AstraZeneca. In the United States, despite an impressive vaccination drive, experts believe the country still remains in a complicated stage of the pandemic. Meanwhile, one of the worst-hit countries, Brazil, registered 3,321 new deaths and over 69,000 infections in the past 24 hours.
In the United States, a federal investigation has been launched into policing practices in Minneapolis a day after one of its former officers was convicted of murder of George Floyd. U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland said the probe would look whether the police department engages in a pattern of excessive force, among other issues. The decision follows national outrage against racism following the killing of African-American Floyd by white officer Derek Chauvin in May last year. Chauvin was found guilty of second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and manslaughter. Sentencing is likely to happen in 2 months, and Chauvin could spend decades in jail. He is expected to appeal against the verdict. Shortly after the verdict, President Joe Biden said the conviction can be a giant step forward in the march towards justice in America. Russian President Vladimir Putin has warned of a harsh and swift response to any foreign provocations. In his annual address to the nation, Putin said Moscow seeks to have good ties with the other countries and hopes to foreign states will not cross its red lines. He warned not to mistake Moscow's good intentions for weakness. His comments come at a time when relations with the West are strained over Ukraine and the health of Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. Last week, the U.S. tightened sanctions on Russia over accusations of hacking and election interference. Well, the Czech Republic accused Moscow of a role in explosions at an arms depot in 2014. Both expelled Russian diplomats, with Moscow responding with tit-for-tat expulsions. The U.S. says talks between Iran and the world powers in Vienna to save the 2015 nuclear accord have been positive. Talking to the reporters, the State Department spokesperson Ned Price said, however, a long road remains ahead.
Price said U.S. envoy Rob Malley has been exploring concrete approaches on steps that need to be taken by Washington and Tehran. Meanwhile, Iran's President Hassan Rouhani says a conclusion can be reached soon if the U.S. acts honestly. Iran's top negotiator Abbas Araghchi warned that whenever the talks move towards demanding too much, killing time, or illogical bargaining, Tehran will exit the negotiations. European Union's representative Enrique Mora announced a third working group to address sequencing of practical steps. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia has asked the international community to reach a stricter agreement, this time with strong monitoring and control measures. The talks are set to resume next week.
More stories to follow right after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi has thanked Iranian President Hassan Rouhani and Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei for supporting Islamabad's stance on Indian-occupied Kashmir. Qureshi met Rouhani and conveyed the goodwill message from Pakistan's President Arif Alvi and Prime Minister Imran Khan. Pakistan's Foreign Office's ways to further strengthen the age-old bond between the two brotherly countries were discussed. President Rouhani expressed resolve to enhance bilateral ties with Pakistan. He called for a stronger coordination in trade, investment, communication channels, and border management. Greece and Saudi Arabia have signed a deal to lend a Patriot air defense system to the kingdom. Greek Foreign Minister Nikos Dandias met his Saudi counterpart Faisal bin Farhan in Riyadh. In a press release, Dandias said the deal will contribute to the wider security of the energy sources for the West. Athens also signed a cooperation agreement with the Gulf Cooperation Council and called it a big step forward. Dandias and Greek Defense Minister Nikolaos Panagiotopulos also met Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. This follows an escalation in drone strikes on vital Saudi targets by Yemen's Houthi rebels. Lebanon says peace with Tel Aviv remains far-fetched as long as there is no real peace between Israel and Palestine. UN envoy Amal Mudallali said Beirut continues to support the official Arab position on a two-state solution. Speaking at a webinar, she said Lebanon paid the price for attempts to have uncomprehensive peace agreements with Israel. This comes a week after the US said talks between Israel and Lebanon will benefit Beirut's crisis-hit economy. The International Libya Quartet has expressed readiness for a robust and effective ceasefire monitoring mechanism in Libya. The UN, the EU, the Arab League and the African Union have also called on Libyan factions to speed up the ceasefire implementation efforts. In a joint statement, the Quartet members called for the immediate and unconditional withdrawal of all foreign forces from Libya. Earlier, the UN Security Council unanimously voted to send up to 60 international monitors to Libya to oversee the ceasefire. Syria has been stripped of its voting rights at the global chemical weapons watchdog by the member states. The ruling comes after Syrian forces were found to have repeatedly used poison gas during Syrian civil war. A majority of members of the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons supported the decision to immediately revoke Syria's privileges at the agency. The draft document to ban Damascus' rights was proposed by 46 nations, including the US, Britain and France. It was circulated among 193 members at the Hague-based agency. An Indonesian submarine has gone missing during a training exercise in waters north of the island of Bali. Officials have launched search efforts for the vessel after it failed to relay results as expected. The country's military chief said at least 53 people were on board the submarine. Indonesian officials have asked Australia and Singapore for help in the search operation. The submarine reportedly disappeared in waters about 96 kilometers off the coast early in the morning. In charge, slain leader Idris Deby's son will take over as president in place of his father. According to a charter released by the presidency, General Mehmet Idris Deby will also serve as the head of the armed forces. The charter repeals the preceding constitution and will be implemented as the basic law of the republic. Deby's son had overseen his father's security as the head of the elite presidential guard and had appeared alongside him. Earlier, the Chadian rebels rejected a military transition and vowed to march on the capital and N'Djamena. Meanwhile, French government says President Emmanuel Macron will attend the funeral of the late Chad president. So time for a short break. We'll be back with more stories. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Pakistan has been elected to 3 key United Nations bodies. These bodies include the Commission on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice, the Commission on the Status of Women, and the Commission on the Population and Development. Pakistan's envoy Munir Akram says this reflects the international community's recognition of the country's positive role at the UN. It was the 6th time that Pakistan got elected to the Justice Commission. Meanwhile, it triumphed with 50 out of 53 votes in the election for the membership of the Commission on Status of Women. Pakistan will assume the membership of 3 commissions on January the 1st next year. The European Union has clinched a deal on a climate change law. The law will commit the EU to more than halving its net greenhouse gas emissions by the end of 2030. In a tweet, Commission Vice President Frans Timmermans said this is a landmark moment for the EU. He said the EU reached the deal to write climate neutrality target into legislation as a guide to policies for the next 30 years. The agreement follows intense negotiations between the European Parliament and EU member states after months of deadlock. EU lawmakers wanted to go further to 60%, but environmental campaigners had said the cut should be 65%. The deal still needs formal approval from Parliament and the national governments. In Sri Lanka, hundreds have gathered in Colombo to commemorate the second anniversary of the deadly Easter Sunday bombing. The suicide bomb attacks killed more than 260 people and injured more than 500 others in 2019. The memorial service took place with armed soldiers around St. Anthony's Shrine, one of the three churches that were attacked. The service went on amid restrictions on gatherings to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. Claimed by ISIS, the blasts targeted three churches and as many luxury hotels. The bombings happened despite authorities having information about the attacks nearly 3 weeks ahead of the time. The International Atomic Energy Agency says it hopes South Korea's experts will take part in the monitoring of the Fukushima water release. This comes as Seoul mulls over Japan's offer to take part in the UN nuclear watchdog-led verification efforts amid growing health risk concerns. In an interview, IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi said a collaboration of experts from South Korea will be very valuable. Grossi said the IAEA is an impartial technical body and does not take sides. He added the body's mission is to ensure complete adherence to international standards before, during and after the operation. Japan plans to release over 1.25 million tons of contaminated water from its Fukushima nuclear plant into the Pacific Ocean. In South Korea, a court has rejected a claim by the country's sexual slavery victims seeking compensation from Japan over their wartime sufferings. About 240 South Korean women had registered as victims of sexual slavery by Japan's military in World War II, of whom 15 are still alive. Seoul's Central District Court ruled Tokyo should be exempted from civil jurisdiction under the principles of international law. Victims' representatives denounced the decision, saying the court ignored their struggles to restore the women's honor and dignity. Japan insists all wartime compensation issues were settled under a 1965 treaty that normalized relations with South Korea. The two countries agreed to irreversibly end the dispute in a 2015 deal. Another business updates. The Wall Street stocks have surged after sliding for 2 straight sessions. Airlines stocks maintained the losing spree after the US said it will increase travel advisories to 80% of the countries. The Nasdaq Composite attained modest gains as Netflix released a disappointing report showing decline in shares. In a letter to shareholders, Netflix said nearly 4 million people signed up in the first quarter, well short of projected 6 million. The DJI index traded over 0.5% higher, while S&P 500 was also up over 0.25%. Meanwhile, the oil prices dropped for a second day on concerns that soaring COVID-19 cases in India will drive down fuel demand in the country. In cricket, Pakistan beat Zimbabwe by 11 runs in the first T20 international of a 3-match series at Harare. They restricted Zimbabwe to 138 in reply to a target of 150 runs. Craig Irvine remained the top scorer with 34 runs as no other batsman managed a decent score. For Pakistan, Usman Qadir was the pick of the bowlers for his 3 important wickets. Earlier, Mohammad Rizwan single-handedly took Pakistan to a fighting total with an unbeaten knock of 82. He was declared man of the match for his brilliant innings. The 3-match T20 series will be followed by a 2-match Test series. In football, Chelsea have made it to the top 4 of the Premier League after sharing a goalless draw with Brighton at home. The draw lifts the Blues to 4th place on goal difference above West Ham United. The hosts struggled to find a way through the well-marshalled defence of relegation-threatened Brighton. Chelsea's every attack was mopped up by the visitors' backline led by captain Lewis Dunk. Brighton substitute Adam Lallana missed a chance to win the game in the 77th minute, fighting wide of the net. Brighton remain 16th in the league and are 7 points clear of the relegation zone with 6 games to play. And that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.